and that might be the subject of an entirely different study, lecture, presentation as well, which I might do down the track. But yeah, so the opening text that I want to look at is from the Talmud. It's very interesting, and I'll just read it to you here. I've got a slide as well. You can just sort of have a look at and read along with me if you like. And it says, the rabbis taught, a Gentile once came before Shammai and asked, how many laws have you? 2 laws, the written and the oral law, answered Shammai. I believe thee as regards to the written law, but do not believe thee as to the oral law, said the Gentile. I will convert to Judaism on the condition that thou teach me the written law. Shammai rebuked him and drove him away. He then came to Hillel. Now Shammai and Hillel were the chief schools of rabbinic Judaism around the time of Yeshua, and these men are the subject of this little saying here. He then came to Hillel, this is the Gentile, with the same plea, and Hillel accepted him. He began teaching him the Hebrew alphabet in regular sequence. The next day, he taught him the letters backwards. You did not teach me so yesterday, the man objected. I, my son, must thou not repose confidence in me? Thou must likewise repose confidence in the oral Torah, which appears at first sight is different from the written law. And that's from page 49 and 50, new edition of the Babylonian Talmud, translated by Michael Rodinskin, revised and corrected by Reverend Dr. Isaac M. Wise. So that's a very interesting little story there. And the thing that's interesting about it is there's a misconception of what the oral Torah is, even though it speaks of there being 2 Torahs, technically speaking. And I guess the main fear a person has when coming into this walk is that if there's any talk of anything that is in addition to the scriptures, that is in an oral form, that is in a kind of, a form that we can't sort of capture, and it is captured and it is all written down, and it has been published and written, but this concept of, oh my goodness, so there's all this additional stuff, that means what do I believe to be true? Somebody could come to me and say, well, that's in the oral Torah, and walk away, and I haven't got a leg to stand on it. And getting to the heart of the reservations that new believers have is this issue, which is very genuine, and you shouldn't really criticize it. Not everybody is trepidatious about the oral Torah because they've got a default disrespect to rabbinic Judaism, but in my experience that's been the case in a lot of instances. But it's not a bad thing to be cautious about it, and that's why I'm putting this presentation together, and there are many other good presentations, much better than the one that this is going to be. Well, this one's going to be good, but that will explain to you what exactly the oral Torah is. And the best way I can describe it is that the oral Torah is more of a clarification of the Torah. It's rather than an additional Torah. It expands on the Torah, and it gives you insight into the Torah. When you look at the Hebrew letters on the Torah scroll, I like to think of it as the Torah being the actual black letters, and the white surrounding the letters is the actual oral Torah, the negative space. And yeah, I just think that's a sort of a good sort of symbolic way of looking at it, and in a sense showing that it is actually there, as the white or the lighter brown of the parchment surrounding the black kosher ink of the Torah text itself, the black fire and the white fire, the rabbis call it. Now, first of all, we have to accept that human beings observed the Torah before it was codified at Mount Sinai. That's the first thing we need to iron out. We need to get out there, and we need to present as fact. And it just takes you 5 seconds to go, well, actually, yeah, that's true. Before the Torah was given at Sinai, it's recorded right up until Mount Sinai event that people who followed Yahweh Elohim, the one Elohim, that they were following a series of laws and commands. And so this is before Mount Sinai. And if we look at ancient cultures, all ancient cultures, there's no exception, they all had an oral tradition. Not Books weren't invented then. Scrolls were usually the domain of those who were rich, or those who were religious and supported financially by the wider body of the people. And so most information regarding Yahweh Elohim's will was transmitted orally. No, even tablets were quite rare, and if they were around, the student wasn't really able to go home and take the tablet home, and the tablet wouldn't be able to really contain that much information either. And so brains back then were quite robust compared to our brains today. What we normally do today is we refuse to remember something, so we go straight to a pen and paper and write it down, and as if we automatically assume that we're not going to remember a phone number. People who lose their mobile phones now, they're in all sorts of bother because they don't memorize any phone numbers, whereas a couple of years ago, before mobile phones could hold phone numbers, a lot more people actually could remember at least 3 or 4 or 5 phone numbers off the top of their head. But the average person now who's grown up with a mobile phone will be lucky to actually even know their own phone number. And so if their mobile phones get lost, they're pretty much gone. And so we know that Adam was taught the Torah by Yahweh. This is evident in the scriptures when we see the prohibition against eating certain food, Genesis 2:15 and 17. And he was given the commandment to be fruitful and multiply, according to Genesis 1:28. On another occasion after the fall, when the Creator sought them on foot, in Genesis 3:8, he verbally identified himself by calling out, avoiding eavesdropping, which is not really what the snake did. And then we have Cain and Abel displaying some knowledge of the Torah by presenting offerings before Yahweh. In fact, Noah, Abraham, and Yitzhak and Yaakov all knew of a right ruling that was inseparable to the Creator. This is because it was originally in the hearts of all men, but over the generations it gradually diluted or was eroded out of the heart to a point where only 8 humans retained obedience to it and were saved by the salvation of the ark made of acacia wood. How would Noah have known which animals were ritually pure? And what was Yaakov studying in his tent if there was no formal knowledge of the Torah before Mount Sinai? So I mean, I could pretty much end the lesson there if the argument was, is there an oral Torah? And the answer would be yes. I could pretty much end the broadcast now and just go, okay, well that's finished it. It's obviously there was some sort of oral tradition that was manifest from the very time of the first humans in Gan Eden all the way up to before Mount Sinai. I'm not saying that they didn't actually scrolls didn't come into development with the early form of Hebrew written on it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that prior to that, something has to be airborne before it's written down. Before something is written down, something has to be audibly transmitted, whether it's transmitted in an audible manner or through some mind, being able to read somebody's mind. It's not in a tangible written form. It's in an ethereal form. It's floating around. We can see that the creation account in Genesis 1 is verbal sayings, is all oral. So yes, there is definitely, very obviously, some form of oral understanding, and that's what I love about the Tanakh, is it doesn't feel like it has to give you an explanation as to where Cain and Abel got the understanding that bringing an offering in the form of flesh, animal, or grain was something that was going to be potentially pleasing to the Almighty. The text just doesn't feel that it has to spoon feed you. It's sitting there and it's saying, if you want to find out what this text is saying, then you've got to delve into it and study it. I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to baby you through every command, like the 10 Commandments and some of the more obvious commandments in the text. It's down to a student's insatiability for the text to really get out of the text what he's prepared to put into it, and that's no different in any discipline, and it's certainly no different in the discipline of studying Scripture. So if a person does not accept that the Torah in whatever capacity was observed before Mount Sinai in Genesis 26:5, where Yahweh tells Yitzhak that Abraham was obedient to his mitzvot. So if you go to Genesis 26 verse 5, it says Yahweh tells Yitzhak that Abraham was obedient to his commands, to his love connections. And so if you're not down with the fact that there was some sort of oral relating of what pleased the Almighty, then Genesis 26:5 is never going to sit nicely with you. It's just a fact. So how can it be that the Torah was around before Mount Sinai if Scripture talks about the time of its introduction? Now, it's interesting, if you go to Galatians 3:17, it says the Torah that came 430 years later cannot nullify the Abrahamic Brit covenant so that it should make the promise of no effect. So this is interesting because on the one hand, this Galatians 3:17 verse is saying the Torah came 430 years later after the circumcision of Abraham, and so it's giving you an actual timing of when the Torah was given. And you think, well, so that's when the Torah was given. It says there very plain as day in Galatians 3:17, but then it says it cannot nullify the Abrahamic covenant, his Brit, so that it should make the promise of no effect. And so what we see here is very evident. On the one hand, if somebody goes to Galatians 3:17 to prove that this is when the Torah was given, then they've got to try and explain what place the Abrahamic covenant has that was given 430 years prior to that. And they're going to look pretty stupid. And so even before the Abrahamic covenant, you had the Edenic covenant, which consisted of the prohibition to not eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge, the tree of life, no, the tree of knowledge, and to procreate, the positive commandment to procreate, and then so that's the Edenic covenant, and then you've got the Adamic covenant, which is the Adamic pair covenant, where they receive certain commands and curses, if you will, after having partaken of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. So we've already got two covenants, and we've just left Gan Eden. We're fresh out of Gan Eden, and there's already two covenants. There's already two principal aspects of how the Almighty is telling His creations to behave, and all done orally, all transmitted orally. And then after that, you have mankind becoming quite violent and quite perverted, and then everything bottlenecking down to 8 families, Noah and his family. And then after the cataclysm of the mikvah that covered the world, the gathering of waters over the surface of the earth, we have Noah then bringing an offering, and then we have the Noahide covenant. So we have 3 covenants now, and the Sinai covenant's nowhere to be seen, and there's nothing written yet. So I don't know how, for the life of me, I don't know how we have people that still argue against the fact that there's no oral Torah, there was no oral tradition, even if you don't accept the rabbinic interpretation that there was an oral explanation, as I've mentioned before, and an extrapolation on the text, which we can say is an oral Torah, a second Torah, if you will, but it sounds a bit frightening. Let's admit it if you use that terminology. I just don't know how you would stay fashionable if you're going to argue, there's no oral Torah. Oh, that's right. I was saying, yeah, even if you don't believe that there was some additional information given, then you've got to at least concede that there was an oral Torah before Mount Sinai. I'd love to hear comments. If anybody's going to comment on that, I'd love to hear what people might say, and I'm sure there might be some good answers. I'm ready for them. But the interesting thing is, in defense of the rabbinic interpretation, which is the interpretation I subscribe to, and bear in mind, if you get my second book, Lightning from the Master's House, that's not quite where I was at when I wrote that book. If you have a look at the chapter on Torah and traditions, and that book was very much a collection of writings that really sort of described where I was at in that part of my journey, which is not where I'm at now. I'm further along up the rungs in the ladder, I would hope. And so the interesting thing is, when the Torah gets, so you've got let's go back to the covenants. You've got the Adamic covenant, you've got the Edenic covenant, the Adamic covenant, you've got the Noahide covenant, then you've got the Abrahamic covenant, and these covenants all precede the Sinai covenant. And this is what Galatians is saying, that this Abrahamic covenant isn't nullified by the Sinai covenant, and so too the Noahide covenant isn't nullified by the Abrahamic covenant. None of the covenants nullify each other, but they just continue to build on one another. Anyway, back to what I was going to say. You have a look at the Sinai covenant, and the telltale sign when you're reading the Torah is that you read statements like Yahweh saying to Moshe, make this according to the pattern that I showed you, the Tabnith. You think, well, there are no diagrams in the Torah. It'd be cool if there was little diagrams and pictures that are actually part of the Torah. You roll the Torah scroll open and there's these Hebrew letters, and all of a sudden there's a gap and there's a little diagram and a picture of a menorah and stuff like that. There's nothing like that in the text. Yet when you read the text, the Almighty is saying, referring to stuff that we really don't see in the text. And I've used the analogy before. It's like me writing an email to somebody and saying, as in the email that I sent you formally, and if you were to come along and read that email, you would obviously assume from that I sent an email prior to the one that you're reading. And you see little hints at that when you go through the Torah, that there's some additional things going on, and there's some other things that Moshe was shared other than what we actually see written down. Now, the Karaites say, well, Exodus 24:4 says Moshe wrote down all the words of the Torah of Yahweh. But Genesis also says that all flesh outside the ark was going to be wiped out. And I'm pretty sure there were no fish bowls on the ark. So we know that the sea life wasn't wiped out. So we've got to look at the whole context of what's being said. I'm sure you would have a problem, provided the person doesn't subscribe to the Moshe's seat, with Yeshua saying everything that the scribes and the rabbis, everything that the scribes and the Pharisees teach, do it. I think before he goes on to say they're not living up to what they're teaching, I'm sure there'd be a lot of people saying everything. Everything. Surely there was a no good Pharisee, and we know there were no good Pharisees because we see them come out of the woodwork when they try and catch Yeshua out. Yet Yeshua says everything that they do. I mean, let's argue about that. If you want to argue about Exodus 24:4, all the words of the Torah, Moshe wrote down all the words of the Torah for Yahweh. What about Yeshua saying this outlandish statement? But then you have the Moshe seat thing, and the Karaites will argue, well, everything that they say that when they're quoting the Torah, when they sit in this fictitious Moshe seat, which I still can't get my head around. But anyway, and I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of people sort of complaining about that. But hey, it just doesn't hold water. At Mount Sinai, certain mitzvot contain practices that are designed to recall specific events. Abraham would not have likely celebrated Pesach, at least not in the form that it was given at Sinai, because it contained rituals designed to recall key moments in his future offspring's history. In Deuteronomy 6:20 and 23 it says, "And when your sons ask you in times to come, saying, what do these testimonies, these chuchim, these statutes, and these mishpatim, these judgments mean, which Yahweh Elohim has commanded you, then you shall say to your son, we were Pharaoh's slaves in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, and Yahweh brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand, and Yahweh showed signs and wonders great and grievous upon the Mitzrites, upon the Egyptians, upon Pharaoh, and upon his entire household before our eyes, and he brought us out from there, that he might bring us in to give us the land that he swore to our Havot, our fathers." So while festivals, particularly Pesach itself, embodied rituals that foreshadowed future events, it would have been letting the cat out of the bag if pre-Sinai Israelites were privy to the commandment with the above clarity. The fact that Abraham was uncircumcised for the majority of his life also testifies to the likelihood that he did not observe Pesach. Now, it's also believed that the Israelites didn't observe Pesach while they're in the wilderness. It wasn't until Joshua had them circumcised before they crossed the Jordan. I think it was afterwards, or it might have been before, I can't remember, that they didn't observe Pesach until then. Exodus 12:48 says, all the males must perform Brit Milah, flesh circumcision, and then let him come near and hear it. And he shall be as one that is born in the land, for no uncircumcised person shall eat of it. Speaking of the Pesach Korban there, it is interesting to note that Abraham's nephew Lot had hastily baked matzot bread for angels who arrived at his home in Sodom, just like Israel was later instructed to do so before leaving Egypt. So we have Lot hastily baking bread before it had time to rise, all hinting at future things that were eventually going to be codified in the Sinai covenant. There are many layers of covenants given throughout Scripture. In addition to the major covenant at Sinai, each new covenant builds on the last and gives greater insight into Yahweh's will. Their giving at different times throughout history should not imply that they were reactionary or made up on the spot statutes. On the contrary, the nature of their giving appears in event-related tutorial form extracted from a pre-existent framework. Gosh, what was I doing when I wrote that? I'll read it again. On the contrary, the nature of their giving appears in event-related tutorial form extracted from a pre-existent framework. Gosh, it sounds good and it does make sense, but it just, yeah. Anyway, Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan explains the value of the Oral Torah in his Handbook of Jewish Thought. I think I've got that up here. You can actually have a look. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I'll put it up here for you, and you can have a read of it while I read it to you. Just have a drink of water. The Oral Torah was originally meant to be transmitted by word of mouth. It was transmitted from master to student in such a manner that if the student had any question, he would be able to ask and thus avoid ambiguity. A written text, on the other hand, no matter how perfect, is always subject to misinterpretation. Furthermore, the Oral Torah was meant to cover the infinitude of cases which would arise in the course of time. It could never have been written in its entirety. It is thus written in Ecclesiastes 12:12, of making many books there is no end. Elohim therefore gave Moshe a set of rules through which the Torah could be applied to every possible case. Okay, so that's interesting, and I think I remember hearing Rabbi Mizrahi, a bit controversial with some Messianics. They don't like him because I think he called for the death of two Messianic Jews. Kind of put a few people off. Despite that, and I've had a look into that, and he may have just had a bad day. I'm hoping he did. But I believe, even though this guy's ultra-Orthodox Jew, and he'd hate me using the word ultra, doesn't believe in who we are, thinks we're all crazy. This guy's teachings are some of the best teachings you'll actually see for free on the web. He doesn't hold any punches. But if you ever get a chance, I think him, and there are a few other Orthodox guys that I recommend, if you can take it, you should watch them. And obviously there's a large array of good Messianic Nazarene teachers out there, but I would advise one's study and the time that they spend in listening to lectures, that you balance it. You do a good balance of Orthodox Jewish teachings, and you do a good balance of good Nazarene teachings as well, rather than just ignoring entirely one or the other. I think it's all about balance. Okay, so the concept is, and that's why I mentioned Mizrahi. He spoke about the fact that if the Torah was to cover every subject, every synagogue or Messianic sanctuary, place of worship, and study, they would have to bring 20 trucks to the place of worship to hold the Torah scroll, because it would just be such a mammoth book. So what had to happen was there had to be a book that was available and was able to be carried by one person and was very economically written. But when you dive into the text, when you look at the sentences, the words and the letters and the way they're arrayed, there's much more than is actually in the actual Hebrew when one reads it in a horizontal fashion. And so it has an ability to actually contain more information than it actually has that first meets the eye. And this is where a lot of the understanding of the oral Torah comes from. And then you've got the traditions, which actually are in addition to that, which are observances that people have arrived at by way of, and I use this expression all the time, deductive reasoning in the text, in their pursuit of finding out what pleases the Creator. And people can get that wrong, and we saw that with the Pharisees. We saw how greed and jealousy and gluttony and all these types of desires sort of contorted them and sort of made them these sort of ghastly people. They may have been good teachers, but if they weren't living what they were teaching, then their teaching was not profiting them anything. In fact, their teaching was condemning them. So the better their teaching was, and the more they weren't obeying their own teaching, it could be detriment to them. It was actually sort of more detriment to them. And so this is the warning that all teachers should every now and then allow to be absorbed and to think on and meditate on, and it might allow a lot of teachers not to end up getting in trouble and coming up with stuff down the track when they get a little bit of popularity and notoriety, and it won't go to their heads. Okay, so I want to have a look at Song of Songs, and this is from and I showed this to Mark earlier tonight, my Shamish. This is from the Stone Edition Tanakh, which has got very sort of small commentaries, but there's a great introduction before every book of the Tanakh, which most people call the Old Testament. And in the Song of Songs by Solomon, or Song of Solomon it's called, there is a direct reference to the Oral Torah, but you'll only find it in this edition because this edition contains what's called the Rashi's where is it? Yeah, I don't know if you can see it there. Rashi's allegorical translation, according to Rashi. I don't know if you can see it there. And that means that the poetry of the Song of Songs, and those that have read the Song of Songs will know that it speaks very beautifully about subjects of intimacy and longing and being with the object of our desires. And it's a very beautiful book to read because it does have like a poetry to it. And what Rashi has done is gone in and he's cut through the symbolism and he's putting the actual this real subject that's being spoken about as you go through and read the passages in Song of Songs. And it still reads quite beautiful, but when you get to chapter 7, and what's interesting, if you go to other Bibles, I think King James and other sort of more common Bibles, and you have a look at chapter 7, there are a few verses missing, and this is how the verse reads in the Stones Edition Tanakh, Song of Songs, chapter 7, verse 13. It says, "Let us wake at dawn in vineyards of prayer and study. Let us wake at dawn in vineyards of prayer and study. Let us see if students of writ have budded, if students of oral law have blossomed, if ripened scholars have bloomed. There I will display my finest products to you." And that is not how most Bible translations handle that, because this is the allegorical rendering of the passage, not the straight sort of mechanical rendering of the passage. And I think, if memory serves me correctly, I've actually got the slide up there so you can have a look at it. We'll read it again. "Let us wake at dawn in the vineyards of prayer and study that is the yeshivot or yeshivas. Let us see if students of writ have budded, that is those of the written Torah, and if students of oral law have blossomed, if ripened scholars have bloomed, there I will display my finest products, that is my students to you. Song of Songs, chapter 7, verse 13. Okay, so there you have it, a direct reference to the oral Torah there, in the allegorical rendering of Song of Songs. The verse contains a reference to the oral Torah, a subject that is criticized by Christians and most non-Jewish Messianic believers as being, and Jewish Messianic believers, as being unbiblical. It also correctly relates the subject matter to the reader. Yeah, I've already spoken about that. Just going through my notes, just excuse me here. Yeah, so the problem is that if you're not going to actually delve into Song of Songs, and I think also the Book of Psalms, I think you're going to get an allegorical version of the Book of Psalms. I don't know if the Stones edition has the Psalms allegorically written. I think it does, actually. Let me have a look. It's after Ezekiel, isn't it? No, there's no mention of it being allegorical. I thought it was. Let me just see the introduction here. No. That's okay. Going the wrong way, here we are. Yeah, no. It's just Song of Songs. Okay. Now, the oral Torah is also mentioned elsewhere in Scripture, and it's actually in Proverbs chapter 1, verse 8. And if you have a look at our Proverbs series, which I think I got up to chapter 3 so far, verse 5 of chapter 3, I do mention this in our Proverbs series that is up on our website. And in Proverbs 1:8 it says, "My son, hear the discipline of your Abba, and forsake not the Torah of your Ima, your mother." The beginning of the verse, "My son, hear the discipline of your Abba," in turn refers to the written Torah. So in ancient times, the written Torah was also euphemistically referred to as the discipline of the father, and the oral Torah was referred to as the instruction of the mother. And so this terminology was interused. So they would sometimes refer to it as the Torah to the father's teachings and the oral Torah to the mother's teachings. All right. So the two parts of the Torah that the sages speak of is the Torah Shibiktav, which is the written Torah Shibiktav, which is composed of the 24 books of the Tanakh, and Torah Shiba'al Pei, which is the oral Torah. I think I've also got a slide up there so you can look at the pronunciation as well. I'll put that up. Sort of not worrying too much about my slides this evening. So the Torah has two parts. There's the written Torah, the Torah Shibiktav, and then there's the oral Torah Shiba'al Pei. So Elohim told Moshe that he will give him the Torah and the commandments. And this is interesting because you do find verses like this that speak of the Torah and the commandments. Now, a savvy Christian would say, "Oh, that's referring to the Ten Commandments and the Torah." Well, the Ten Commandments are part of the Torah, so that doesn't make sense. But okay, let's just agree that that's what you're saying. In Leviticus 23:3, it also mentions the concept of a Torah and of commandments. Now, the word Torah and commandments can be used interchangeably. So why is it referring to Torah and commandments? Because it's believed that it's referring to both the oral, the Torah Shibiktav, and the Torah Sheba'al Pei, the oral Torah, the written and oral Torah. Why did Elohim add the word commandments? Are there many commandments which are not included in the Torah? This verse amongst others is clear reference to the existence of the oral Torah. So the oral Torah was transmitted from father to son and from teacher to disciple. Originally the oral Torah was not transcribed. Instead it was transmitted from father to son and from teacher to disciple, thus the name the oral law. Approximately 1800 years ago, Rabbi Yehuda, the prince, concluded that because of all the travails of exile, the oral Torah would be forgotten if it would not be recorded on paper. So many sages and rabbis and yeshiva students were being wiped out that they eventually had to start to write down some of the wisdom, and because they thought, well, it might be wiped off the face of the earth. See, the problem is when you write something down, it then becomes vulnerable, because you can write something down and then that thing that you've written it down on, that can fall into the hands of somebody that the person who put the words on the page isn't around there to actually sort of oversee them reading and interpreting it. So if somebody with a completely foreign mindset reads it, and they can get an entirely different understanding of the text, and then they can go on to learn other things that are being taught in the text based off a skewed foundation. Now, the advantage with a teacher teaching you orally is that he will teach you a segment of the Torah, then he will ask you, do you understand what I've just taught you? And if you say yes, he will say, explain it to me. So then when you explain back to the rabbi or the Pharisee what he's just taught you, and if it's incorrect, he will correct you. Now, a book doesn't have that ability. You can pick up a million books and read a million well-written books, but there's no way of telling whether you're going to read a passage or a paragraph or a page or a chapter where you misinterpret some things and never pick up on it, and that may serve you detrimentally down the track when you're trying to pick up other understandings based off an understanding that isn't really cemented correctly. And the advantage with a teacher is he will go, okay, I'm not... Normally when you were taught Torah and then you came back the next day to receive another lesson, the rabbi will expect the student to be able to tell him what he learnt the previous day, and if he can't tell him, then he goes back to that same subject and he teaches it again. A book won't do that. You'll read a chapter. How many times have you read a chapter in a book and you weren't really concentrating and you remember a few things, but on the whole you didn't remember it, and you went, oh, it doesn't matter, and I'll move on to the next thing. And then when you're reading the next thing, you find that it's mentioned something that you weren't concentrating on and you don't get it, and now you're all over the place. So here's why they were for so long trying to avoid writing things down. In fact, there is a posuk about a page of Tanya that was found blowing in the street, and the Hasidim were brought before the wider Jewish community, which saw them as a kind of an annoying sect at the time, and they were going to be brought up on charges that this very sacred portion of scripture in this Hasidic text had been sort of blowing around in the wind in the street. And I think what happened was that one of the rabbis, the Hussids of the day, saved the day by giving an analogy of a king who has a beautiful ruby in as a centerpiece of his crown, and his son gets ill, his princely son gets ill, and some sort of doctor of medicine comes before the king, being maybe summoned to see what he can do to save his son. And he said to the king with a straight face, and it's the king, you're not going to lie to the king, he said, King, if you were to take that precious jewel that you have as a centerpiece of your crown out, and you grind it down into fine powder and add it to soup and feed it to your son, there is a very slim chance that your son would live. And so he uses that analogy, and the king goes, yeah. He grinds it down, the son eats the soup with the ground down powder from the jewel, and he ends up living. And the point was that even though this sacred text was blowing around the gutter in the street, there's every chance that somebody could have picked it up and could have actually been of some sort of inspiration to a Jew. And it was obviously in a Jewish ghetto. It wasn't flying around a Gentile street, heaven forbid. I hope I've told that story right, but yeah, it's an interesting story. I have to go and review that one. I love rabbinic and Hasidic stories. I'll often relate impromptu Hasidic tales that speak about the Baal Shem Tov. I think they're amazing. I wonder how many stories about Yeshua that are extracurricular to what we have written in texts are going to come to the fore in the coming years. I think it's the book of John ends with there being many other things that he did, but they weren't recorded because there were just too many of them in the Nazarene writings. Anyway, so back into the subject. He assembled the scholars of his generation. He compiled the Mishnah, a short-handed collection of the oral teachings that preceded him. Since then, the oral law has ceased to be oral, and as time passed, more and more of the previously oral tradition was recorded. So technically, there is no oral Torah today because most of the oral Torah is written down. So okay, I'll give you that one. The oral Torah consists of three components: the laws given to Moshe at Mount Sinai, the halakha le Moshe Sinai. When Moshe went up to heaven to receive the Torah, Elohim gave him the written Torah together with many instructions. These instructions are called the halakha le Moshe mi Sinai, the law that was given to Moshe on Sinai. Maimonides writes that it is impossible for there to be an argument or disagreement concerning the halakha of Le Moshe Sinai, for the Jews who heard the instructions from Moshe implemented them into their daily lives and passed it on to their children, who passed it on to their children, etc. Some examples of halakha Le Moshe Sinai are tefillin straps, when it says you shall bind them as a sign upon your arm and wrap them as a totafot between your eyes. What do you wrap around your arm? What do you put between your eyes? And it's believed that the tefillin are part of the oral Torah because you're showing what you're meant to be, how to construct them and how to put them on and how to take them off and so on and so forth. The details of the Mezuzah scroll are part of the oral Torah. Circumcision, the laws of circumcision are part of the oral Torah. You'll never find there be anything specific about how the process of circumcision works. The laws of a convert, making a convert, that's all part of the oral Torah. There's nothing in Scripture that has anything about how you're actually meant to have a person become a convert. That's all part of the oral Torah. What else? There's a ton of stuff, an absolute ton of stuff. The kosher laws, most of the kosher laws are from the oral Torah. Really, all we have in the Torah is what animals are kosher and what animals aren't kosher, and a little bit on a little bit more about that goes into a bit more detail, but nothing about the nitty gritty of keeping the knife sharp and making sure, oh that's right, the animal has to be sort of healthy and without blemish and things like that. But there's really, when you have a look at all the kosher laws that you can find on eating kosher, it overflows and just goes far beyond what's in the written Torah. And surprisingly, you see Karaites observe kashrut laws that accord with a lot of rabbinic halakha, and really they just sort of cherry pick. I'm sorry I'm picking on the Karaites, guys, but I mean that's woeful. I mean, to me, Karaism's one of the craziest sects I've ever seen. Okay, so the 13 principles of Torah exegesis: Shlosh Esrei Midot Shichat Torah Nidrashet Bachim. When Elohim gave, so this is the 13 principles of Torah exegesis. When Elohim gave the Torah, of the written law, to Moshe, he also instructed him how one is to study and understand the Torah. So there's a way of studying the Torah. There's a way of understanding it, and this is where Talmudic study actually comes to some sort of value, because when you look at the discussions in the Talmud, they're tackled in a way, the same way that you should actually look at passages within Scripture. So if you learn the way the Talmud debates and gets to the bottom of text and analyzes, and then you bring that into when you're studying the scriptural text, you can get you a lot further in actually gleaning gems out of the actual scriptural text itself. So the Talmud in that regard has quite a bit going for it. You begin to think like the national mindset of the people of the Hebrews, of the Jew. You start to put on the mind of a Jew when you're reading the scriptures that are Hebraic, and you begin to have a Hebraic mind, that looking at it, then you're just going to get so much more out of it. It's just obvious. So every word and letter in the Torah is exact, and many laws can be extrapolated from extra or missing word or letter or particular sequences which the Torah chooses to use. And if you have a look at the Torah, as we know with Rashi, who comments on everything in the Torah that it seems to be an anomaly, he's just about got a commentary on every verse. So every actual sentence of the Torah appears to have some sort of oddity about it, or error about it, repetition of letters missing from words, some letters large, some letters enlarged, some letters smaller in size, sentences that seem to repeat the same subject but say it in a different way, spacing of letters, all sorts of stuff. And when you look at it, you go, oh, that's a mistake. And they're all through, almost verse after verse, you'll find little sort of Easter eggs, as they call them. Oh no, I've used the word Easter. Please don't tune out. For instance, one of the rules is anything that is included in the general statement, but it was removed from the general statement in order to teach something that was removed to teach only about itself, but to apply its teaching to the entire generality. Oh gosh. You want me to read that again? Okay, one of the rules are anything that was included in a general statement but was removed from the general statement in order to teach something was not removed to teach only about itself, but to apply its teaching to the entire generality. Whoa, if you can really wrap your head around what that sentence is saying in its entirety, you're doing better than me. An example for the usage of this rule is in Exodus 35:3, the Torah says, "You shall not light fire in any of your dwellings on the Shabbat day." Now, kindling a fire was already included in the general statement and that prohibits work on Shabbat, Exodus 20:10. It's giving you an example of that word offense I read before. It was rumored from the general rule and stated independently in this verse to teach us that it is a distinct form of work and as such carries a distinct penalty. Moreover, this lesson applies to each of the 39 categories of work included in the general statement. Thus, there isn't a broad category called work. Rather, each type of work is to be viewed as a distinct. Therefore, if someone should do several kinds of work while unaware that they are forbidden on Shabbat, he must bring a separate sin offering to atone for each type of work that he did. A full list of the 13 principles can be found in, the footnote has just disappeared in the annals of time there. Number 3. Okay, so what are we looking at? Just going back to what we're looking at. We're looking at what the oral law consists of. These are the components of the oral law. Number 3 is the edicts, the gezerot. The rabbis constantly added gezerot according to the needs of the times. The Torah authorizes the rabbis to protect the word of the Torah through making gezerot, edicts. Now, people have a real issue with this, and you need to back off, because these were done during perilous times when the Torah was very much in danger. We've lived in the last 40, 50, 60 years. It's Disneyland, up until the Holocaust was a different story, but in the years after the Holocaust, it was like, the Jews were left alone. They were giving the Almighty was giving them time to prosper again. And so if we go back to these other times in history, up to the last 70 or 80 years ago when it was the Holocaust, then things had to be brought in to actually try and preserve the sanctity of the Torah when it could be curtailed so heavily by the aggressive goyim. Okay, so the authorizes rabbis to protect the word of Torah through making edicts. For example, the Torah prohibition of eating or possessing chametz, leaven products on Passover, begins at midday on the 14th day of Nisan. Our sages added 2 hours to this prohibition, for they feared that on a cloudy day people would err and eat chametz after noon. So the prohibition has been added to not break the commandment as an added measure to keep it from not being broken. So this is, and it's interesting. I wonder if anybody can sort of understand this, that there are things that these wise men came up with that weren't from Yahweh. They were man-made, but they were done in a way that had a positive effect on the Torah and allowed people to observe it without the risk of breaking it, due to bad weather and people not knowing whether the sun had gone down or not. I love this. Just like a Congress is constantly enacting new laws and regulations, for the old laws are not always adequate for modern trends and tendencies, so too the rabbis constantly added gezerot according to the needs of their times. Although the Torah commands us to follow these gezerot, there are distinctions between rabbinic decree and the Torah law. And if you go through and read the Talmud, what I like about it is it'll say this is a rabbinic command, this is a rabbinic ordinance, and this is a Torah ordinance. So even the Talmud itself shows you that distinction. This is rabbinic and this is Torah. So why would it bother showing that distinction if it didn't want you to know that there was something that's rabbinic and there's something that's Torah? And this is the whole issue people have supposedly with rabbinics, is that the line between what's man-made and Torah is blurred when they don't do that. They're saying this is rabbinic, this is Torah. They've got nothing to hide. One of the distinctions is that when there is a doubt concerning a Torah law, one must be stringent, whereas if there is a doubt in rabbinic decree, one may be lenient. Enter King Messiah Yeshua. I've just blown your mind. Hopefully. Did you hear what I just read? I'll read it again. And this is from the rabbinic writings. This is one of the components that make up the oral Torah that describe what makes it up in its length and breadth. One of the distinctions is that when there is a doubt concerning the Torah law, the most stringent path is taken. Whereas if there is a doubt in a rabbinic decree, the most lenient is taken. So what did we see Yeshua do? He was being lenient in the rabbinic ordinances. Not the Torah, but the rabbinic ordinances. Until the end of the Talmudic era, approximately 1,500 years ago, if I can say that, there was a central rabbinic authority which issued gezerot, which were accepted by all the Jews since that time. Different communities have assumed upon themselves various stringencies, but rarely are they universally accepted. And that's about it tonight for the oral Torah. And as you can see, there is a mountain of stuff I didn't look at with the oral Torah, but there is some really good key things that I looked at tonight that I hope you go back and study and have a look at and check. Don't be so jumpy with it. If you go on to Hebrew for Christians, which is a really, really good website for people that are very new to the faith, go on to Hebrew for Christians and have a look at on that website the portion about the oral Torah and have a read of what that says. And that's a very, very good website. Whoever put that together really knows his Hebrew. He really knows history. He really has a love for Judaism, and it just has an unlikely name, Hebrew for Christians. So when you read that, you think, okay, this is for Christians, and it's a website to teach them Hebrew. It's so much more than that. But that will show you that this website that appears as though it's sort of a Christian website even has much credence in what we know as the oral Torah. I hope you really enjoyed what I shared with you this evening. Please hit like and share the video, and perhaps make a comment. If it's a negative comment, please try and be nice, and I'll answer the comment. There's no need to be rude or be angry. We're all learning, and I've got no axe to grind, except that I believe that I'm teaching truth. I'm not a scholar. I'm just a regular guy like you, just a leader of a small congregation in Australia, doing the best we can, and we could use your prayers and your support. I'm not speaking about funds, but if you could share a Facebook post, if you're friends with Netzri Mantassi on Facebook, or like a post, or tick like for any of our YouTube videos, because the more likes we can get, the more credibility it lends to the ministry, and people think, wow, this video's got a lot of likes, I might actually have a listen to this video and see if it's any good. That doesn't cost you any money, but it does so much to support our ministry. Thank you very much, and I think the next teaching that I'll be doing from home will be probably Psalms 18. We're up to Psalms 18. We're moving through those Psalms, and then we'll be looking at the fourth and final part of Torah and tradition. We'll be looking at the Talmud and some of the Jewish writings, and trying to make these writings less fearful to you, less like evil books, and more like books that you might end up purchasing one day and having in your library and having there as a reference book to support you in your study of the scripture itself. Thank you very much for joining me, and have a wonderful night or day, or whenever you're watching this recording. If you're watching it a rerun, thanks again. Bye now.